Help! Somebody, please help! The woman's scream pierced through the evening air as I was cutting through the park on my way to an important meeting. My heart nearly stopped at the sound of such raw terror. The chill autumn wind carried a voice across the empty paths, making an echo between the trees. I quickened my pace, following the sound. The park's lamppost cast long shadows across the ground, creating a maze of darkness and light. As I got closer, I could make out two figures in the distance, a woman struggling against a man who was trying to drag her away. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but I knew I couldn't wait for help to arrive. Someone needed me now. "Hey! Stop right there!" I shouted, surprised by the strength of my own voice. The sound bounced off the surrounding trees, making it seem like multiple people were yelling. The attacker's head snapped up at my voice. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the darkness. There was something familiar about him, but in the poor lighting and rush of adrenaline, I couldn't place it. He released his grip on the woman who fled into the shadows, his footsteps fading into the night. I rushed to the woman's side just as her knees buckled. Her face was pale, and her designer suit was disheveled from the struggle. As I caught her before she hit the ground, she looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes that somehow stirred a distant memory. "Thank you, She managed to whisper before her eyes rolled back and she went limp in my arms. My mind raced as I gently lowered her to the ground, propping her head against my jacket. The meeting I was supposed to attend flashed through my thoughts. It was arguably the most important meeting of my career. But looking at the unconscious woman before me, I knew there was no choice to make. I called for an ambulance, and within minutes we were on our way to the hospital. As the paramedics worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I knew her from somewhere. There was something about her face, even in unconsciousness, that tugged at old memories. The hospital waiting room was quiet except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights and an occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor. I'd already missed the meeting, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. What kind of person would I be if I abandoned someone in their time of need? My phone had been buzzing incessantly with messages from work, but I ignored them. That's when I heard the angry footsteps approaching, the unmistakable sound of expensive leather shoes storming down the hospital corridor. My boss burst through the door, his face flushed with anger, followed closely by Brad Thompson, our project leader. The sight of them made my stomach turn. I knew what was coming.
"You abandoned a business-critical meeting to help some random woman?"
My boss bellowed, his voice echoing off the sterile hospital walls.
"You have any idea what you've done? Your position here is finished."
I stood up slowly, my resolve hardening with each passing second. A company meeting versus someone's life? That shouldn't even need to be weighed against each other. "Fine," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I quit." My boss's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a particularly deep crimson. Brad, standing slightly behind him, wore a smug smile that made my skin crawl.
"You fool!"
my boss spat out, following with a harsh laugh.
"You've just thrown everything away you worked for."
I met his gaze steadily. "Just wait and see." Little did I know how those words would come back to shape everything that followed. My name is Tyler Davidson, and like most American boys growing up in the suburbs of Minnesota, I spent my childhood dreaming of becoming a superhero. My room was a shrine to Cape Crusaders and mass vigilantes. Action figures lined my shelves, posters covered every inch of wall space, and comic books filled boxes under my bed. The idea of helping the weak and fighting evil wasn't just entertainment for me, it was a calling. My mother would often find me perched on the back of our couch, a towel tied around my neck as a makeshift cape, preparing to swoop down and save the day. "Tyler, honey," she would say with a patient smile, "real heroes don't need capes, they just need good hearts." As I grew older, my obsession shifted from traditional superheroes to video games. There was something magical about controlling a character's journey from ordinary person to hero. I would spend hours immersed in these digital worlds, completely captivated by the way simple choices could lead to extraordinary adventures. It was during this time, in 3rd grade, that my life changed in a way I never expected. Our teacher, Mrs. Henderson, stood at the front of the class one morning, her hands clasped together with that special excitement teachers get when they have news to share. "Class, we have a new student joining us today," she announced, gesturing to the door. "Please welcome Emily Winters." A girl walked in, her dark hair neatly braided and her uniform perfectly pressed. She stood straight and tall, but I could see her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her skirt, a tiny tell that betrayed her nervousness. Emily stood out immediately, not just because she was new, but because she carried herself differently than the rest of us. While she wore scuffed shoes with wrinkled shirts, she looked like she stepped out of a department store catalog. The boys in class whispered and pointed, while the girls huddled together, casting suspicious glances her way. Mrs. Henderson assigned Emily to the empty desk next to mine. As she walked down the aisle, I noticed her shoulders were slightly hunched, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. The confident posture from her introduction was already crumbling. During recess that day, I watched as Emily sat alone on a bench near the playground. Her lunch barely touched. The other girls had formed their usual circles, deliberately turning their backs to her. Something about that scene made my chest hurt. It reminded me of all the stories where the hero had to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to her bench. "Hi, I'm Tyler," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered in my chest. "Want to hear about this awesome show I watched yesterday?" Emily looked up, surprise flickering across her face. You want to talk to me?" "Well, yeah," I replied, settling on the bench beside her. "Unless you're busy solving world hunger over here by yourself." I got a small laugh out of her, just a quiet chuckle, but it was something. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as I launched into an enthusiastic retelling of the latest episode of my favorite superhero show. So then, right when it seems like all hope is lost, the hero realizes his true power was inside him all along. I gestured dramatically, nearly knocking over Emily's juice box in the process. "Inside him all along?" Emily raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "That sounds a bit convenient, doesn't it?" "Well, maybe," I admitted, grinning. "But sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones, right?" From that day forward, something changed. Other kids started joining our lunch conversations. First just one or two, then more. Emily's initial shyness began to melt away, revealing a quick wit and infectious laugh that drew people in. Since we lived in the same direction, walking home together became our daily routine. We'd take the long way, cutting through the park where the cherry trees lined the path. Emily would tell me about life in the city, about tall buildings that seemed to touch the clouds, about streets that never slept, about restaurants that served food I couldn't pronounce. One particularly warm afternoon, as we kicked through the pile of fallen leaves, Emily turned to me with an unexpected question. "Tyler, why'd you talk to me that first day?" I stopped walking, caught off guard by the seriousness in her voice. "What do you mean?" "Most people," she said slowly, "they see someone who's different, and they stay away. But you didn't. Why?" I thought about it for a moment, watching a leaf spiral down from above. "You know in games when you see an exclamation mark over someone's head?" Emily nodded, though she looked confused about where this was going. "Well, it means there's a quest there, right? Something important to do? When I saw you sitting alone, it was like seeing that exclamation mark. Sometimes being a hero isn't about fighting bad guys or saving the world. Sometimes it's just about being kind when someone needs it." Emily was quiet for so long that I worried I'd said something wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. That's really nice, Tyler." The next day, she invited me to her house after school. That's when I met Matthew, her younger brother. He was a grade below us, with the same dark hair as Emily, but with an energy that seemed barely contained in a small frame. When he spotted my handheld gaming system poking out of my backpack, his eyes lit up like fireworks. "No way! You play Dragon Quest Warriors too?" he exclaimed, practically bouncing in place. Before I knew it, Matthew and I were sprawled out on the living room floor, deeply engaged in a multiplayer battle. Emily sat on the couch above us, attempting to read a book, but constantly peeking over the pages to watch her game. "You guys are so into it," she complained after a while, but I could hear the curiosity in her voice. I paused the game and held out my console to her. "Want to try?" Her eyes widened. "Really? But I've never played before. I'll probably be terrible." "Everyone's terrible at first," I shrugged. "That's what makes getting better fun." Matthew watched skeptically as I showed Emily the basic controls. "She won't like it," he muttered. "She never wants to play when I offer." But to everyone's surprise, especially Matthew's, Emily took to gaming like a fish to water. Within an hour, she was pulling off combinations I hadn't mastered until weeks into playing. Her face lit up with each victory, and soon we were all taking turns, cheering each other on and sharing tips. Those afternoons at the Winters house became the highlight of my days. Mrs. Winters would bring us snacks, always something fancy that my mom never bought, like imported cookies or exotic fruits. She'd smile knowingly when she found us all huddled around the gaming console, Emily usually winning while Matthew and I tried to figure out how she got in so good so quickly. "It's simple logic," Emily would say, her fingers dancing across the buttons. "This combo worked once, it'll work again. You guys just get too excited and forget the patterns." One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled outside, Emily achieved a perfect score on a particularly challenging level. The victory music played as Matthew and I stared at the screen in disbelief. "That's amazing!" I exclaimed. "I never thought of using the power-ups in that order." Emily ducked her head, but not before I caught the proud smile spreading across her face. Her cheeks flushed pink at the praise. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that I would come to recognize as her tell when she was pleased but embarrassed. But our perfect world couldn't last forever. The news came on a Monday morning, delivered by our teacher in the same cheerful tone she used for announcing class parties. "Class, I have an announcement to make. Due to her father's job transfer, Emily will be leaving us at the end of the week." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emily sat rigid in her seat, her eyes fixed on her desk. I could see her fingers gripping the edge of her chair so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Everyone wanted to spend time with Emily before she left, suddenly realizing what they'd been losing. But there was an undercurrent of sadness to everything we did, like a countdown ticking away in the background. The night before she was set to leave, I paced my room, unable to sleep. My old gaming console sat on my desk, and as I looked at it, an idea formed. Without thinking too hard about it, because thinking too hard right now might make me change my mind, I grabbed the console and ran downstairs. "Mom!" I called out. "I need to go to Emily's house." My mother looked up from her book, surprised. "Tyler, it's almost 8 o'clock. Please, Mom, it's important. It's a hero thing." Something in my voice must have convinced her, because after a moment's hesitation, she grabbed her car keys. 10 minutes, no more." When we pulled up to Emily's house, the moving truck was already parked outside, casting long shadows in the streetlight. Emily came out to meet me, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. "Tyler, what are you doing here?" I thrust the console toward her, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Here, take this with you." Emily stared at the console, then at me, her eyes wide. "But this is your precious console. I can't take this." "Think of it as having a piece of me with you," I said, pushing it into her hands. "Take good care of it." I'd borrowed that line from an anime I watched recently, where the hero gives something important to someone special before saying goodbye. It sounded way cooler in my head than it did coming out of my mouth, but Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she hugged the console to her chest. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." Matthew came out too, drawn by the sound of voices. When he saw what was happening, his own eyes got suspiciously bright. "Group hug!" he declared, throwing his arms around both of us. Standing there in the growing darkness, we made our pinky promises to meet again someday. None of us knew when or how, but in that moment, it felt like the most solemn vow in the world. As I watched their car disappear down the street the next morning, I realized something important about being a hero. Sometimes the hardest part isn't fighting the bad guys or saving the day. Sometimes it's letting go of the people you care about, trusting that the bonds you forged will somehow bring you back together again. Years passed, but my passion for gaming never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger as games became more complex and storytelling more sophisticated. My room evolved from action figures to gaming posters, and my allowance went straight to the latest releases. One evening, I was intensely focused on completing a particularly challenging boss battle. My mom leaned against my doorframe, watching me play. "You know, Tyler," she said thoughtfully, "if you love games this much, why not make it your career?" I paused the game and turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "Well, somebody has to make these games, right? And who better than someone who understands what makes them special?" That conversation was like a key unlocking a door I hadn't even known was there. Suddenly, I started looking at games differently. Instead of just playing them, I began analyzing them, breaking down the mechanics, studying the storytelling techniques, wondering about the decisions behind each design choice. My high school teachers were confused when I started relating everything back to a game development. In English class, I wrote essays about narrative structure in RPGs. In physics, I asked questions about game engine calculations. Even in art class, I focused on digital design and pixel art. "Are you sure about this?" My mom asked when I told her I was applying to technical colleges specializing in game development. It's not exactly a traditional career path. I showed her the research that I'd done, the growing gaming industry, the success stories, the potential for creative expression. Plus, I added with a grin, think of all the money you'll save on games when I can make them myself. She laughed and hugged me. Just promise me one more thing. Don't lose that heroic heart of yours to the corporate world. After graduation, I landed a job at Wilson Games. They weren't the biggest names in the industry. They had something special. They were veterans, one of the original pioneers. They created several classics I'd grown up playing, games that had helped shape my love for the medium. My first position was in quality assurance, or as we called it, QA. Basically, I played games all day looking for bugs. It sounds like a dream job, but trust me, playing the same level 100 times in a row, trying to break it in every possible way, can make you question your life choices. On another crash in the forest level, I announced one day, about 3 months into the job. If you jump exactly at the right angle while holding 3 specific items and whistling the national anthem. My supervisor Dave chuckled.
You're thorough, I'll give you that. Most new QA guys would have missed that edge case.
I shrugged, just trying to think like a player. You know, there's always that one kid who'll try everything possible to break the game.
I do know.
Dave said with a meaningful look.
I think I'm looking at that kid right now.
That attention to detail paid off. In my second year, I got promoted to the story development team for a new project. Instead of just finding bugs, I was helping create the very experiences that had inspired me as a kid. The development department had its own special atmosphere. During regular working hours, it was relatively calm. People coding at their desk, artists sketching at their tablets, writers brainstorming in meeting rooms. But as deadlines approached, it transformed into something else entirely. Coffee run! Someone would shout at 2 a.m. The hands would shoot up across the room for orders. I have to debug this physics engine one more time. I'm going to cry. Another would groan, face planted on their desk. But through it all, there was this underlying sense of excitement. We were making games, actual games that people would play and hopefully love as much as we did. The first time I saw my name in the credits, even though it was buried deep in the QA section, I couldn't stop grinning. My mom insisted on recording it on her phone, watching the entire credit roll multiple times just to see my name scroll past. Sure, the job had its downsides. My shoulders ached from hunching over keyboards, my eyes strained from staring at screens, and I probably consumed enough caffeine to power a small city. But every time I saw someone playing one of our games, every time I read a positive review or saw a kid's face light up at a demo, it all felt worth it. I thought I found my perfect place in the world. Then came the announcement that would change everything, the day Brad Thompson entered our lives. News came during our regular Monday morning meeting. Our department head, Mr. Chen, cleared his throat uncomfortably before making the announcement.
Everyone, I'd like to introduce Brad Thompson, who'll be taking over as our new development manager.
Brad strode into the room like he owned it, which, considering his father was executive VP, wasn't far from the truth. He wore an expensive suit that looked out of place among our casual development team attire, and a smile never quite reached his eyes.
Looking forward to working with you all,
he said, scanning the room with the air of someone evaluating cattle at auction.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll accomplish great things together.
Next to me, Karen, one of our senior developers, muttered under her breath. A sales guy's our manager? This'll be interesting. Her tone made it clear interesting wasn't the word she really wanted to use. Later that day in the break room, I overheard Mark from the animation team talking to some others. Brad barely did anything in sales, you know. Just rode his dad's coattails and took credit for other people's work. I tried to keep an open mind. After all, connections alone don't necessarily make someone incompetent. Maybe Brad would have surprised us all with hidden talents and unexpected insight. I was wrong. So very, very wrong. Brad's idea of management consisted mainly of making impossible demands, without understanding the first thing about game development.
We need to add full VR support to the game,
he announced one day, 2 weeks before release. The room fell silent. Finally, Sarah, our lead programmer, spoke up. Brad, that would require completely rebuilding the engine. It's not feasible at this stage.
You're professionals, right?
Brad's voice took on that condescending tone we'd all come to dread.
Just get it done quickly.
When Sarah tried to explain the technical limitations, Brad's face darkened.
Are you talking back to your manager? I can have you fired any time, you know.
That threat hung up in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah, who'd been with the company for 12 years and had helped create some of our most successful titles, looked like she'd been slapped. I stood up. Brad, maybe we could schedule a meeting to discuss the technical requirements for VR support. That way we can present a clear timeline and resource needs. Brad's attention shifted to me, his eyes narrowing.
Fine. Have it on my desk tomorrow morning.
After he left, I spent half the night helping Sarah compile a detailed report explaining why VR integration would be impossible for our current timeline and budget. We included graphs, technical specifications, and market research data. The next morning, we found the report in the trash, unread. That was just the beginning. Brad's leadership style, if you could call it that, was a mixture of micromanagement and complete disinterest. He'd hover over people's shoulders making unhelpful comments one day, then disappear for days at a time the next. The breaking point for me came one afternoon when I returned from lunch to find my computer had been tampered with. Critical game design files that I spent weeks working on were gone. Jenny, a junior developer who had been eating at her desk, caught my expression. Tyler, I saw Brad at your computer while you were out, she said hesitantly. He was clicking around a lot, muttering something about teaching people respect. When I confronted Brad about it, his reaction was predictable.
You left your screen unlocked,
he shouted, his face turning red.
This is a security violation. It's your fault. Some development leader you are.
He was right about one thing. I should have locked my screen. But the fact that our manager would deliberately sabotage his own team's work spoke volumes about his character. My colleagues rallied around me. People stayed late helping me restore what we could from backups. Karen even ordered pizza for everyone, saying, if we have to deal with this nonsense, we might as well do it well fed. Then came the announcement that would change everything. Our company had secured a collaboration with Winter Tech, the hottest new gaming company in the industry. This was our chance to prove ourselves, to show we could still compete with the big players. Brad was officially assigned as our project leader, but I ended up managing the actual development team. My job became a delicate balance of translating Brad's unreasonable demands into achievable goals, while protecting my team from his worst impulses. He seemed to particularly enjoy bothering the younger staff, especially women. His comments would start work-related, but quickly veer into inappropriate territory.
Why isn't this character model done yet?
He'd ask Lisa, our newest artist. Then, leaning too close.
By the way, are you still single?
We developed various warning system, a quick message in the team chat. Brad alert would give people time to look busy or make themselves scarce. At least he usually left early, claiming important meetings that everyone knew were actual golf games with his father's friends. 1 month into the Winter Tech project, the pressure was mounting. Our team was struggling to meet Brad's unrealistic deadlines while maintaining our quality standards. The crucial meeting with Winter Tech's executives was scheduled for that evening, a meeting that could make or break our company's future. That morning, I arrived early to prepare my presentation materials. The office was quiet, except for the gentle hum of computers and the occasional ping of early morning emails. As I was reviewing my notes, Brad sauntered in, whistling. You seem unusually happy today, I remarked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Brad's grin widened, reminding me of a cat that had just cornered a mouse.
Yeah, I'm seeing my favorite girl tonight,
he said, straightening his designer tie.
She's been playing hard to get, but I know she wants me.
The way he said it made my skin crawl. I focused on my computer screen, not wanting to encourage further conversation. Just make sure you're prepared for the meeting, I said. Winter Tech's executives will be expecting detailed progress reports. Brad waved his hand dismissively.
Whatever, just make me look good.
Throughout the day, I caught him checking his phone repeatedly, smirking at messages. He seemed more focused on his personal plans than our potentially company-saving meeting. As evening approached, I packed up my materials and headed out. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I decided to cut through Parker Park to save time. During the day, it was a lovely spot filled with families and joggers, but at night, it transformed into a maze of shadows and silence. The park's lampposts cast weak circles of light along the path, barely penetrating the growing darkness. Fallen leaves crunched under my feet, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet. I checked my watch, still plenty of time to make the meeting. That's when I heard it. Help! Somebody please help! The scream shattered the evening silence like a stone through glass. My heart jumped into my throat. I stood frozen for a moment, straining my ears. Had I imagined it? No! Please, stop! This time there was no doubt. The voice came from somewhere ahead, near the old fountain. My vision isn't great, especially at night, so I pulled out my phone and activated the camera, using it to zoom in on the scene. Through the phone's screen, I could make out two figures struggling near the fountain. A man was forcefully pulling a woman along, his hand clamped over her mouth. Something about his movements seemed familiar. Almost without thinking, I hit record. Years of working in QA had made documentation a reflex. When you see something wrong, you capture evidence. My hands were shaking, but the image was clear enough. I knew I should call the police. I knew I should wait for help. I had never been in a fight in my life. My combat experience was limited to button mashing and fighting games. But standing there, watching someone in distress, I heard my mother's voice from long ago. Real heroes don't need capes. They just need good hearts. "Hey! Stop right there!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the trees. It came out stronger than I expected, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. The attacker's head snapped up. In that brief moment, illuminated by a nearby lamppost, I caught a clear glimpse of his face. My blood ran cold as recognition hit me, but before I could process it, he was running, disappearing into the shadows. I rushed to the woman who was slumped against the fountain's edge. Her expensive suit was disheveled. Her dark hair had fallen across her face. As I reached her, her knees buckled. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, looking up at me with familiar eyes. Then she fainted, collapsing into my arms. Looking down at her unconscious form, I felt a nagging sense of recognition. There was something about her features, something that tugged at old memories, but I couldn't quite place it. I gently propped her against the fountain and called for an ambulance. As I waited, I checked my watch again. The meeting would be starting soon. I should call Brad, let him know I'd be late. Brad, the attacker, the familiar movement. No, it couldn't be. Could it? The ambulance arrived with flashing lights but no sirens, cutting through the park's darkness like a lighthouse beam. Paramedics worked efficiently, checking the woman's vital signs as they loaded her into a stretcher. I followed them to the hospital, my mind racing between concern for the unconscious woman and growing suspicion about what I'd witnessed. The hospital corridors were painted that particular shade of off-white that's supposed to be soothing, but somehow manages to be unsettling instead. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat in the waiting room, surrounded by old magazines and the faint smell of disinfectant. I tried calling Brad's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "Brad, there's been an emergency. I won't make it to the meeting. You'll need to handle the presentation." His response came as a text message.
What? You can't do this to me. I'm not prepared.
Of course he wasn't prepared. He never was. An hour passed, then two. Nurses walked by periodically, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. The woman still hadn't regained consciousness, and something in me couldn't bear the thought of her waking up alone. That's when I heard it. The angry staccato of expensive shoes storming down the hospital corridor. I stood up, bracing myself for what was coming. My boss burst through the waiting room door, his face flushed and his tie askew. Brad chilled behind him, and I noticed his usual smug expression was replaced by something else. Fear?
You abandoned a business-critical meeting to help some random woman?
My boss roared, his voice bouncing off the sterile walls. A nearby nurse shot us a warning look, but he ignored it.
You have any idea what you've done?
I straightened my spine, feeling a calm clarity settle over me. Yes, sir, I do. I helped someone who needed it.
The Wintertech executives were furious. They're questioning our commitment to the project. Your position here is finished.
I looked at Brad, who was hovering near the door, his eyes darting between me and the hospital room where the woman lay. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the hospital's cool air. In that moment, everything clicked into place. His strange behavior all day, his comments about seeing his favorite girl, the familiar way the attacker had moved in the park. I felt my hands clench into fist. A company meeting versus someone's life? That shouldn't even need to be weighed against each other. But this was about more than just missing a meeting. Fine, I said, my voice steady and clear. I quit. My boss's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a particularly deep crimson.
You what?
I quit. I repeated stronger this time. I won't work for a company that values profits over people's safety. Brad let out a harsh laugh, but I could see the tremor in it.
You fool,
he sneered.
You've just thrown away everything you've worked for.
I met his gaze steadily, holding up my phone so he could see it. Just wait and see. The color drained from his face as he realized what I might have recorded. Before anyone could respond, a commotion from the hospital room caught our attention. The woman had regained consciousness. I walked past my spluttering boss and visibly shaken Brad, entering the room where she lay. The hospital lights cast soft shadows across her face, and as she turned to look at me, the nagging sense of recognition suddenly crystallized into certainty. Those eyes. I knew those eyes. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Because of me, your important work. Emily? I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. Emily Winters? Her eyes widened with recognition, and a soft smile spread across her face, the same smile that had made my heart skip a beat all those years ago. You haven't changed at all, she said quietly, her voice carrying a warmth that bridged the years between us. For someone who wrote a dialogue for a living, I was suddenly at a loss for words. This is the second time you've helped me, you know. The first was when we were kids. Memory after memory came flooding back. Afternoons spent playing video games, walks home through the cherry trees, the night I gave her my gaming console. It all rushed back with such force that I had to sit down in the chair beside her bed. Emily, I started, but before I could continue, the door burst open again. A man rushed in, slightly out of breath, his dark hair disheveled. Sis, are you okay? I got your text and came as fast as I could. He stopped short when he saw me, his eyes widening. Wait, Tyler? Tyler Davidson? Matthew? I stood up, recognizing Emily's brother despite the years. He'd grown taller than me, and his face had matured, but there was still that same energetic presence I remembered. Matthew's expression shifted from concern to joy to serious determination in the span of seconds. Without warning, he bowed deeply. Please, come work for us! What? No, wait, raise your head! I protested, embarrassed by the formal gesture. Matthew straightened up, his eyes intense. I'm serious, Tyler. I owe everything to you. You don't owe me anything, I said, confused. Yes, I do, he insisted. You were my first real friend, Tyler. Do you know what that meant to me? We moved around so much as kids, never staying in one place long enough to form connections. But having you as a friend, it gave me strength. He started pacing the room, his words tumbling out faster. When things got tougher after moving, Emily and I would play games together, just like you taught us. We would encourage each other, compete with each other. That's what kept me going, kept me passionate about games. That's why I turned it into my career. Emily picked up the thread of conversation. Matthew took that passion and ran with it. He developed some incredible games, built Winter Tech from the ground up. She smiled proudly at her brother. After I graduated from business school, he convinced me to join in as an executive. Said he needed someone who could understand both the business and gaming sides. My mind was reeling. WinterTech, the company we were supposed to be meeting with tonight, the company that was revolutionizing the industry of innovative games and breakthrough technology. That was Matthew's company? So when you say come work for us, I started. I mean come work at WinterTech, Matthew finished. We need someone with your talent, your experience, and most importantly, your heart. Emily leaned forward in her hospital bed. Tyler, if you're interested, we'd love to have you join us. I hesitated. WinterTech was creating cutting-edge games that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Their teams were legendary in the industry. Could I really contribute at that level? Matthew must have sensed my uncertainty because his face broke into a mischievous grin, the same one he worn as a kid when he was about to share a secret. You know, he said casually, Emily still has your old gaming console. Says it's her treasure. Matthew! Emily's face flushed pink. Don't tell him unnecessary things. Watching them bicker, it felt like no time had passed at all. We were kids again, sharing games and dreams and laughter. That's when I realized this was more than just a job offer. This was a chance to come full circle. To create games of people who understood what made them magical in the first place. Matthew? Emily? I said, my voice firm with conviction. If you'll have me, I'd love to join. The next morning, I arrived at Wilson Games to submit my resignation. The office felt different somehow, as if overnight it had transformed from a familiar home into just another building. My coworkers gathered around my desk as I packed up belongings. We heard what happened, Karen said, helping me box up my collection of debug reports. Missing the meeting to help someone in trouble, that's our Tyler. Lisa, the artist Brad had harassed, handed me a card signed by the whole team. We're going to miss you, she said softly. It won't be the same without someone standing up to Brad. Speaking of Brad, Jenny whispered, glancing around nervously. He's been acting weird all morning. More than usual, I mean. He keeps making phone calls and looking panicked. I nodded, unsurprised. The video evidence of my phone weighed heavily in my pocket.
We'll throw you a proper goodbye once things settle down, Mark promised, clapping me on the shoulder. Somewhere far from here. As I approached Brad's office with my resignation letter, I could hear him arguing with someone on the phone.
No, you don't understand. I can explain everything. Please, just give me a chance to...
His voice cut off as he saw me in the doorway.
I'll call you back.
He muttered into the phone. My resignation letter, I said, placing it on his desk. Brad's face twisted into a sneer, but I could see the fear behind his eyes.
Running away, huh? You'll never succeed anywhere else. You're nothing about this company.
I was about to respond when commotion erupted in the hallway. My boss's voice carried through the office, unusually obsequious.
It's such an honor to have WinterTech's CEO visit us personally. We weren't expecting. That is, after last night's meeting.
I turned to see Matthew straying down the hallway, Emily beside him. She'd been discharged from the hospital that morning, and though she still looked pale, she carried herself with quiet dignity. My boss's face darkened when he saw me.
You're still here? Get out! We don't need resigned employees hanging around.
Actually,
Matthew said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding a room.
he's exactly who we need here.
The boss froze mid-bluster.
What? Why would you want him?
Because he's our hero.
Matthew replied, his friendly tone carrying an edge of steel.
And speaking of heroes and villains,
He turned to face Brad, who had shrunk back against his desk.
your company employs criminals, doesn't it?
What? Who?
My boss stammered.
The suspect is right here.
Matthew's gaze fixed on Brad.
What proof do you have?
Brad's voice cracked. I held up my phone. It's all recorded here, Mr. Thompson. The color drained from Brad's face as I played the video. The park's lighting had been poor, but there was no mistaking his distinctive movement, the expensive suit, or his face when it caught the lamplight.
That's not... I can explain.
Brad stuttered. Matthew's voice was cold.
Let me explain instead. You became obsessed with my sister after meeting her during a business visit to WinterTech. You repeatedly harassed her under the guise of work discussions, even after she explicitly rejected you. When legal threats didn't stop you, you resorted to stalking.
Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I was careful to always leave the office with someone, but yesterday I had to travel alone due to a last-minute schedule change. You took advantage of that, didn't you, Brad?
Please!
Brad fell to his knees, his carefully manicured facade crumbling completely.
Please let me see Emily! We're meant to be together! She just doesn't understand!
The only thing I don't understand, Emily said quietly, is how someone could mistake fear for love.
My sister was only ever professional with you, Matthew added. You misunderstood everything. The police will sort this out soon enough.
At the word police, Brad collapsed entirely, sobbing on the office floor. 2 officers entered the room. Matthew had called them before coming to the office. As they led Brad away, my boss turned to Matthew, sweating profusely.
Mr. Winters, I assure you, we had no idea. If we had known...
But Matthew was already turning away, disgust evident on his face.
We'll be reviewing all current and future collaborations with Wilson Games. Come on, Tyler. You have a new job to start.
The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. My video evidence, combined with Emily's previous harassment reports and testimonies from other victims, built an airtight case against Brad. He was fired for gross misconduct and faced criminal charges for stalking and attempted assault. But for Wilson Games, Brad's arrest was just the beginning of their troubles.
Another resignation today,
Matthew told me one morning at WinterTech, scanning an email on his tablet.
That makes 15 developers who've left Wilson Games this month.
We were sitting in WinterTech's break room, which was nothing like the cramped space at Wilson. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and comfortable seating areas were scattered throughout. The walls featured the concept art from their most successful games, including several I recognized from Matthew's early work. It's not surprising, I said, sipping my coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt sludge Wilson Games provided. Brad's leadership did more damage than anyone realized. Constant harassment, sabotage of work, impossible demands, it wore people down. The toxic culture went deeper than Brad, Emily added, joining us with her own cup of tea. The fact that management ignored complaints about him for so long, just because of his father's position, that says everything about their priorities. She was right. After Brad's arrest, more stories came out. Other employees, mostly young women, shared similar experiences of harassment that had been dismissed or covered up. The gaming press got wind of it
Wilson Games' reputation tanked overnight.
They're facing bankruptcy now,
Matthew said, putting down his tablet.
Can't release new games with half their staff gone, and no one wants to work for them anymore. They've reached about their potential buyout.
Are you considering it? I asked. Matthew shook his head.
Some companies aren't worth saving. Better to let them fail and make room for something better.
I thought about my former coworkers, the ones who supported me and each other through Brad's reign of terror. What about the good people still there? Emily smiled. I'm already ahead of you. We've extended job offers to several of the key developers who resigned. Karen starts next week as a senior project lead.
Really?
I grinned, remembering how Karen had helped restore my deleted files and kept the team's spirits up during the worst times.
Speaking of new projects,
Matthew said, pulling up a different file on his tablet.
How's your team settling in, Tyler?
I couldn't help but smile. My team in WinterTech was everything I dreamed of. Passionate, creative, and supportive. Ideas were welcome, creativity was encouraged, and everyone's contributions were valued. We're making great progress, I replied. The prototype for the new RPG engine is exceeding expectations. Lisa's art direction is bringing the world to life in ways I never imagined possible.
Lisa?
Emily asked. Artist from Wilson Games? The same, I nodded. Turns out when you're not being harassed by your manager, you can focus on actually doing your job. She's incredible. Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know, Tyler, watching you stand up to Brad, putting yourself at the risk to help others, it reminded me of all those superhero stories you used to love. I felt my face heat up. I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone should do. But that's exactly what makes you a hero, she insisted. To me, you'll always be that boy who wasn't afraid to talk to the new kid, who shared his games and his friendship when I needed them the most. Matthew made a gagging sound.
Ugh, you two are getting mushier by the day.
Emily threw a napkin at him.
Just because you're my brother doesn't mean you get to comment on my love life.
Love life. The words made my heart skip. Emily and I have been spending more time together outside of work. We're discovering our old friendship and finding something new growing alongside it.
Well,
Matthew said, standing up with an exaggerated stretch.
I should get back to work. Some of us have a company to run.
He paused at the door.
Oh, and Tyler? Mom wants you both over for dinner this Sunday. She's dying to meet the guy I used to play video games with.
After he left, Emily turned to me with a soft smile. You know, I still have that gaming console you gave me. So I've heard, I teased. You're a treasure, right? She blushed but didn't look away. It was more than just a console. It was hope. A promise that we'd meet again someday. I used to play it whenever I felt lonely in a new place, imagining you were there playing too. Looking back now, it's funny how life works in circles. That old gaming console I gave Emily became more than just a goodbye gift. It became a thread that kept us connected across time and distance. A physical reminder of promises made and kept. Last week, Emily and I were cleaning out her apartment as she prepared to move in with me. We found the console tucked away in a specifically padded box, carefully preserved despite its age. Did we see if it still works? I asked, dusting off the familiar scratches on its surface. Emily's eyes lit up. I think I still remember all the cheat codes you taught me. We spent the entire evening sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes playing those old video games. The graphics were primitive by today's standards, the sound effects tiny and basic, but none of that mattered. Each level unlocked another memory, her triumphant grin when she mastered a new combo, Matthew's frustrated groans when she'd beat his high scores, the way she scrunched her nose in concentration during boss battles. Remember when you used to let me win? Emily asked, expertly navigating her character through a particularly tricky section. I laughed. I never let you win. You were just naturally good. Still are, apparently, I added as she cleared the level of a perfect score. Well, I had a good teacher, she said, leaning against my shoulder. The next day at work, Matthew caught me staring at the concept art for our newest game project. The protagonist, a young girl with determination in her eyes, was teaching her friend how to play a handheld gaming device.
Bit on the nose, don't you think?
He asked, grinning. The best stories come from the truth, I replied. Besides, how many kids out there might need their own connection, their own thread of hope? Matthew nodded thoughtfully.
You know, when I started WinterTech, I wanted to create games that would mean something to people. Games that could bring people together, like they brought us together as kids.
I'd say you succeeded, I said, gesturing around at the bustling office. Every desk held not just a developer, but someone passionate about creating experiences that would touch others' lives.
No,
Matthew corrected me.
We succeeded. All of us.
Later that evening, as Emily and I walked home through the park, the same park where we reconnected that fateful night, she stopped suddenly under a cherry tree.
I've been thinking,
She said, pulling something from her bag. It was the old console.
maybe it's time to pass this on.
I looked at her questioningly.
The children's hospital, she explained. We could donate consoles, games, maybe even organize gaming sessions for the kids. Give them something to look forward to during long hospital stays.
My heart swelled with pride and love. This was why I'd fallen for her all over again. Her ability to take something personal and turn it into something that could help others.
That's brilliant,
I said. We could make it a company initiative. Get everyone involved.
From 2 kids playing games to touching lives across the city,
Emily mused.
Not bad for a boy who wanted to be a hero.
I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of cherry blossoms. You know what my mom used to say? Real heroes don't need capes.
They just need good hearts,
Emily finished, standing on her tiptoes to kiss me. As we walked home hand in hand, I thought all about the twists and turns that led us here. As a kid, I dreamed of being a hero like the ones in the games and comics. I never thought I'd actually get to be one, especially not twice for the same person. But maybe that's what real heroism is. Not about having superpowers or fancy costumes, but about doing the right thing when it matters most. About standing up for others, sharing what you have, and believing that even small acts of kindness can change lives. Emily and I still play games together, though now we're often testing titles that our own company is developing. Sometimes Matthew joins us, and it feels just like those afternoon sessions in their childhood home, filled with laughter and friendly competition, and the pure joy of playing together. They say you can't go home again, but sometimes home finds you. And sometimes it brings with it everything you never knew you were looking for.